During the cold winter months, the northern countries spend most of their hours in darkness. In an age before electric lights and motorized travel, people would huddle around the fires of their homes, take care of each other, play games, music, or tell stories. Just how we are fascinated by horror movies or creepypastas, the ancients too enjoyed their slice of thrill. It's a shame to think how many of these tales have been lost to time, of the goosebumps, the cold sweats. But, fortunately, remnants of these stories can be found in written form. In the 19th century, authors put great effort into putting local legends and folk tales to paper. Of course, very few of these would have been alike their original iterations, and since they were passed on through generations and multiple households, no narration would have been the exact same. We can go even further back, to the Viking Age, and get a hint of the stories they might have told. In the 13th century, Icelandic writers made an effort to record their poetry, legends, and dynastic sagas. Some of these writers may have been lords, but were most probably Catholic monks, and many of the sagas have been interpreted as Christian propaganda. While many of the sagas are presented as historic biographies, they often mix in fictional elements, the appearance of magic, and for the interest of this video, ghosts. Of special note is the Eyrbyggja saga, written sometime in the 13th or 14th century. It has been preserved in 4 fragments, and in later copies of the original parchment. The saga primarily concerns the colonization of Snæfellsnes, a peninsula in western Iceland, but its subjects are broad and consist of multiple smaller stories, connected by overarching characters. Among these stories are expeditions to Greenland and America, and of course, ghost stories. Aside from being a thrilling tale of horror, the story which I'll recite for you today includes some comedic elements. At the end of the story, the ghosts are exorcised by being put on trial. Our story begins in the summer of the first millennium, the same summer that Christianity became the state religion of Iceland. A ship from Dublin arrived to Snæfellsnes, carrying with it merchandise and a passenger from the Hebrides, a woman named Þorgunna. She was around 50 years old, of tall height, a strong build and dark hair. According to the crew, she carried such wealth as could hardly be found on Iceland. A woman named Thurid was very interested in seeing this wealth with her own 2 eyes. So she went down to the ship and asked Þorgunna if she had any fine clothes. Þorgunna did indeed, but none of them were up for sale. So Thurid offered Þorgunna to stay at her home, hoping she might have a second chance at buying those garments. Þorgunna accepted the offer, but insisted that she'd work for her upkeep. The 2 of them traveled to Frodda, Thurid's farmstead, where Þorgunna was given a room and started unpacking her goods. She made her bed with an English sheet and a silk spread, both of excellent quality, and coveted by Thurid. But when she asked how much Þorgunna wanted for them, Þorgunna replied that even though Thurid was polite and behaved proudly, she would not sleep on the naked hay for her. Thurid took some offense to this and didn't inquire any more on the matter. Þorgunna spent most of her days weaving vadmal, a dense wool cloth, or working with the hay. Thurid had a husband named Thorod, a son named Kjartan, and an elderly couple lived with them on the farm, Thorir Woodenleg and his wife, Þorgrima. Þorgunna was very fond of Kjartan, but the feeling wasn't mutual. One day in autumn when they were collecting hay, a black cloud appeared on the horizon and moved its way to the farm. Everyone expected rain, and Thorod told Þorgunna to take her hay and stack it. She did not listen. Soon, the cloud came over the farm and covered it in complete darkness. No one could even see their own hands. It fell so much rain that all the hay was soaked, and when it disappeared and the skies cleared, they saw that it had rained blood. This shower did not fall anywhere else in the region. It was an entirely local phenomenon. The weather dried up, and with it, the blood and the hay. However, it would not dry from Þorgunna's hay, or the tools she had worked with. Thorod asked her what it could mean, and she said she didn't know, but found it likely to be an ill omen. When they returned home for the evening and got out of their bloodied clothes, Þorgunna refused to eat, and went straight to bed. When Thorod checked on her in the morning, he discovered that she had fallen ill. He asked her how she felt, and she indicated that her time was short. So she instructed him in how she wanted to be buried, and promised how things would go horribly awry if they didn't follow her instructions. Firstly, she wanted to be buried at Skalaholt, a place she thought would be considered holy in the future, and where enough priests already resided to give her body the proper rites. Regarding her possessions, she wished to be buried with her gold ring, and Thorod could have anything else. Thurid was to have a scarlet cloak, as a form of compensation for her next wish, that her bedsheet and spread were burned. Thorod promised to heed her instructions. A few days later, Thorgunna succumbed to the disease. Her corpse was brought to the church and put in a coffin, and the day after, her possibles were to be burned. But when Thurid discovered what they were going to do with the beautiful beddings, she loudly protested and begged her husband not to do so. In the end, he gave in, and he let her have the items she pleased. The coffin was put on a cart and transported by a few men to Skalaholt. The journey was troublesome and plagued by hail and rain. They finally stopped at a farm and asked to stay for the night. The farmer gave them a place to stay, but refused them any other help. But since they didn't want to risk crossing the river at night, they decided to stay anyway. They unsaddled their horses and carried the coffin into a shed, after which they went to bed, without having had anything to eat. At night, the servants heard strange noises coming from the larder. They sent a few housecarls to check if there was a break-in. Inside they found a large, naked woman. She was preparing food. They did not dare to approach her. The transporters confirmed that it was Thorgunna. When she finished her cooking, she carried the food into the main hall and set the table. One of the travelers told the farmer that it might cost him dearly if he didn't invite them to eat. The farmer agreed and offered them any food and aid they might require. As soon as he said it, Thorgunna left the building and did not reappear. Candles were lit around the hall, and the guests were given dry cloths. The food at the table was blessed, and the farmer sprinkled all the buildings with holy water. The guests ate, and despite Thorgunna having prepared it, none of them fell ill. They slept well, and in the morning resumed their journey. Everywhere else they stopped, they were received properly, and they finally arrived to deliver Thorgunna at Skalaholt. The priests graciously accepted an offering from her, after which the travelers made a safe and uneventful trek back home. So ends the first part of our story. But the hauntings at Froða would not. On the evening of the transporter's return, a half-moon appeared on the wall of the longhouse. Everyone who sat around the fire could see it, traveling counterclockwise around the building, before finally disappearing. Thorod asked Thorir Woodenleg what it could mean, to which the cripple said that it was a moon of fate, an omen of someone's death. This would continue for an entire week, and every evening they saw this same moon. Some days after this strange event, the shepherd came home and was strangely silent. He spoke very little, and what came out of him was frightening. It was believed he had been bewitched, because he was always on edge and spoke to himself. This continued for the rest of the season. 2 weeks into winter, he simply came home one evening, lied down in his bed, and the morning after, he was dead. This was when the hauntings began. One night, Thorir Woodenleg had to go outside and take a leak. He went a bit outside of the door, did his deed, but when he came back, the shepherd was blocking the way. Thorir wanted to go past him, but the shepherd wouldn't allow it. So Thorir tried to slip past him, but the shepherd caught him and threw him into the door. Thorir managed to somehow escape, but had been badly battered. Parts of his body had turned pitch black. He soon fell ill and died. After this, the shepherd and Thorir were seen together, haunting the farm and terrifying its residents. Soon one of the housecarls fell ill and died, then a second, and finally, 6 of them were gone. The hauntings continued. During the evenings, they could hear strange noises coming from the storage. One evening when they were about to light the fire pits, a woman saw the head of a seal sticking out from one of the pits. She struck the head with a club, but the seal just flew further up from its hole. A housecarl struck it next, and the seal leapt up to its paws. The housecarl fell unconscious, much to everyone's terror. The boy Kjartan sprang forth and struck the seal with a sledgehammer, but it just shook its head and looked around. He smacked it again and again, until it finally disappeared into its hole, and he could cover it with dirt. Thorod had travelled by boat to collect dry fish, and the morning after the seal incident, the boat went under. The boat and the fish washed ashore, but the bodies were never found. When the news reached Froða, Kjartan and Thurid invited their neighbors for a funeral feast. On the first eve of the feast, Thorod and his companions returned home, all soaking wet. But it was seen as a good omen that those who perished at sea would visit their own funeral feast. Thorod and his men passed through the great hall, without responding to anyone's greeting. They sat down by the fire, and everyone left them until the fires died, and the ghosts disappeared. This continued for every night of the feast. It was believed the haunting would cease after the celebration had ended. On the first evening after the feast, when the guests had all returned home and the fires had been lit, the phantoms returned. They sat down and wrenched the water from their clothes. Then came Thorir Woodenleg and his 6 companions, all of them covered in dirt. They started shaking the dirt off over Thorod and his men. The living left the hall, and they had nothing with which to warm themselves for the cold night. The next evening, they made their fire in another house, thinking the ghosts wouldn't visit, but they did. Kjartan decided that they should make a big fire in the long house and a fire for cooking in the other one, which they did. It worked. The ghosts sat in the long house, and the living by the smaller fire in the other building. Throughout the entire winter, they had heard strange noises from the dried fish storage, but every time that they went to check on it, there was nothing there. So came the day that they needed the fish, but when they went inside, they saw a tail sticking out from the pile of dried fish. It was overgrown with seal hair. One of the men tried pulling at the tail and asked the others to come help him. It wouldn't budge. When they pulled their hardest, the tail slipped away from them and rubbed the skin clean from their palms. The tail was gone. When they unpacked the fish, they found that all the meat had been picked from the bones. Nothing remained, and there was no trace of whatever had eaten it. Woodenleg's wife fell sick and died. On the night of her burial, she was seen accompanying her husband. An epidemic broke out among the household, claiming 6 additional lives. Many more fled from the hauntings. That autumn, they had 30 servants on the farm. By late winter, there were only 7 left. Kjartan traveled to his uncle Snorri for assistance with the hauntings. Snorri Goði was a prominent Icelandic chieftain who appears in several of the sagas. The chieftain delivered him a priest, 6 men, and his own son to help him with the ghosts. His orders were to burn all of Thorgunnar's beddings, and to put the ghosts on trial. When they returned to Froða, Thurid had fallen ill, like the others who had died. Time was short. Kjartan immediately entered the long house, where the ghosts were sitting by the fire. He took down Thorgunnar's beddings, carried them outside, and burned them. Afterwards they re-entered the long house and sued Thorir Woodenleg and Thorod for going around the farm without permission and depriving people of their lives and well-being. All of the ghosts who sat by the fire were sued. The case was treated like any trial at the Thing, the Icelandic Common Parliament. Witnesses were called in, and the objects discussed and judged. When Woodenleg had been judged, he rose up and said, "It was a pleasure to sit while it was still calm." Then he exited the long house. Next, the shepherd was judged. He got up and said, "I'll go then, but it was better before." When Woodenleg's wife had been judged, she rose up and said, "I stayed here for as long as I could." One after the other, the ghosts were judged, rose up, and left the long house. All of them said something when they left, and it was clear that they did so reluctantly. Finally, it was Thorod's time. He said, "So goes the peace, and so do we," and he exited the building. The priest carried holy water and relics through all the buildings. He sang and held mass, after which the hauntings ended on Froða, and Thurid recovered from the strange illness. Kjartan hired more hands for the farm, and grew up to become an enterprising man. And so ends our strange little ghost story. While many elements of it are disturbing or outright terrifying, others might seem a bit silly and read like a parody. Even against the supernatural, Icelandic laws and Christian reason ultimately succeed. Maybe the story was entirely invented by the monk who wrote it down, or maybe he had heavily modified it from the oral tales passed on around the fires. Who knows? If you're hungry for more spooky Viking tales, I uploaded a similar video last year. It's another ghost story pulled from the Eyrbyggja saga. I hope you'll give it a shot and enjoy it.